Hey everyone, welcome to Great Lakes Church. My name is Carson, and I gotta tell you before we get into our weekly message that we're a community of people helping people find and follow Jesus. We're based out of Southeast Wisconsin. We have physical locations in Kenosha and Racine, but if you're listening to this or watching this, you've found our online presence. We share content on our YouTube and our podcast platforms wherever you listen, and we love that you're a part. If you want to know more about what's going on here at Great Lakes Church, you can find out more at greatlakeschurch.com or check out our central hub. But until then, everything you need is going to be in the description, so enjoy the message, and we'll catch you next time.
So, a few weeks ago, during our welcome, we talked briefly about Royal Family Kids Camp and how this year, we're going to be able to welcome a whole lot more girl campers than boy campers because we have way more female volunteers than male volunteers. But if you've been a part of Great Lakes Church for a while, it's not going to shock you that once again, the men of this church stood up to the challenge. And ladies and gentlemen, if things keep moving forward in this direction, we are going to have a record year of both number of campers and number of volunteers. The reason that's exciting is every number represents a name, every name represents a story, and every story matters to God. And so I just want to say thank you, thank you, thank you. As you can imagine, I am incredibly proud of our church once again. And I hope that you are proud of yourselves because you continually step up to the different challenges in front of us. Well, today we are launching a brand new teaching series that we are simply calling Ready or Not. And the premise of this series is that change is coming, whether we're ready for it or not. Now, I don't need to spend a bunch of time convincing you that change is coming because we experience it every day. Right? It's just a part of life. It's a part of culture. In the last 50 years, the population on this planet has doubled. We've gone from almost 4 billion people to now almost 8 billion people. Right? That's a lot of growth. And naturally, with growth comes change. Change to infrastructure, change to mass transportation, change to climate, change to the spread of disease, change to the amount of homes being built. I mean, all sorts of changes. And one of the ways that we probably see it more so than other ways is through technology, right? With self-driving cars, with blockchain technology, 3D printing, quantum computing. I mean, check out this Radio Shack ad from 1991. All right, 13 of the 15 products on this advertisement are now on our phones. So video cameras, calculator, radio, CD player, answer machine, right, all on our phones. The only two that are not are a radar detector, which we could argue that's even on our phones because you can see where cops are, and a three-way speaker with a 15-inch subwoofer, right? That is not on our phones. But the rest of it is on our phone. Our world's constantly changing. Just think of artificial intelligence and how it's slowly taking over our lives and our jobs. One day, you're going to show up to Great Lakes Church, and there's going to be an animatronic pastor on the stage. I baptize you in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Right? Not long ago, someone sent me this artificial chat where you can literally have it write a paper for you. They said, Pastor, you need to write a sermon using AI chat. So I put, do a sermon on forgiveness, write a sermon on forgiveness. And so it wrote this. I kid you not. It started out, Dear brothers and sisters in Christ, if I ever start a message, dear brothers and sisters in Christ, you will know AI has gotten a hold of me, right? But our world's constantly changing. Think about this, where we work from. Used to be you only work from the office. Now it's the home, the office, there's a hybrid, right? It's changing. Our school systems are changing. Education, curriculum changing. There are changes that are constantly occurring within people's worldviews and their values and their beliefs. Every year, laws change. Policies changed because of how polarized and divided our world is. Friendships and relationships are constantly changing and evolving. Our economy is changing. And depending on what it is that's changing or evolving, there are all sorts of emotions that we can end up feeling, whether it's anger or confusion or stress. Sometimes it's surprise. Sometimes it's happiness. Other times it's sadness or disgust. And often what happens is change creates a tension inside of us that makes us uncomfortable, and so we resist it. But change is a part of life. 3,000 years ago, King Solomon of Israel is nearing the end of his life, and he's looking back at some of the lessons he's learned. And he's writing about some of the observations he's made in life. And one of the observations he writes about is this. He says, for everything, there is a season, a time for every activity under heaven. There's a time to be born and a time to die. There's a time to work and a time to rest. There's a time to buy and a time to sell. Right? There's a time to move and a time to settle down. Other than God and his promises, nothing in this life is permanent. Everything is seasonal. And that, quite honestly, isn't even necessarily a bad thing. It can be a very, very good thing. I recently came across a picture of when I was a child, right? So I don't know, maybe 3 years old, 4 years old. Now, here's the deal. Imagine if I never grew up or changed. Some of you would argue, come on, Dave, really? No, but imagine if I never grew up. I just walked around with short overalls on. I carried stuffed animals with me through the hallways. You'd say, hey, Dave, could I get a meeting with you? It's like, Sesame Street's on. You're going to have to wait. Right? Change can be a very good thing. We need change. Life is filled with change. It's filled with seasons. And there's going to be seasons where we feel like we're on the top of the mountain and other seasons where we're feeling like we're in a valley. There are seasons where we're winning, and then there are seasons where we feel like we're losing. Life is filled with seasons, and that is exactly the way God intended it. Matter of fact, in the earliest days of recorded history, we read about God making this promise to all of humanity. God says, as long as the earth remains, there will be planting and harvest, cold and heat, summer and winter, day and night. There's not a single person on this planet who is unaffected by change. Regardless of your age, your gender, your color, your income, your interests, your demographics, your life's going to be impacted by change. Some of the changes we experience in life, they're fun, they're good, they're exciting, we welcome them. Other changes are painful, and they're scary, and they're overwhelming, and so we resist them. But either way, one of the things we have to understand about change is there is no growth without change. If you want to grow in any area of your life, financially, relationally, you want to grow in your influence, you want to grow in some skill set that you have, it starts with change. So if I want to plant a vegetable garden, which I don't want to do, but if I wanted to plant a vegetable garden, what would I do? I'd pick a spot, I'd clear the ground, I'd test the soil, I'd dig up the ground, I'd plant some seeds, I'd water the seeds, and then I would spend a bunch of time trying to keep weeds away. And away from the seeds, right? And away from the plants. There is no growth without change. And yet there's something in us that when it comes to a lot of types of changes, we resist. We run from them. And one of the reasons for that is change involves giving up one thing for another. Right? In just a few months, we're entering graduation season. And graduation is all about change. When a student graduates high school and they receive their diploma, they are giving something up. They cannot just show up to high school the next year and go sit in classes and just observe and make friends and goof around and say, I'm just here for the fun. No, they're going to be escorted out. Why? Because when you receive your diploma, you give up the high school classroom environment for some sort of postgraduate experience. If you make the decision to get married, you give things up. You give up the freedom to date other people. At least you should. Right? You give up some of your independence. It's not like you can just go buy whatever you want, whenever you want, go wherever you want. I mean, that's going to have huge implications on the relationship if you choose to do that. So when we get married, we give something up. That is not a bad thing. That's just the reality of how change involves giving up one thing for another. If you decide to have children, you give up sleep, you give up money, you give up spontaneity, you give up privacy, you give up sanity, you give up lots and lots of free time. But in exchange, you get a tax benefit, so it's not all bad. Change involves giving up one thing for another. Another reason we tend to resist change is because change is a doorway into something new. It's a doorway into the unknown. Now, every day you and I are going through doors, right? We're going through bedroom doors and car doors, and we're opening up front doors and office doors, all sorts of doors. And what doors do is they help us transition from one place to another. So when I open my car door and I get inside, it's different than the outside of my car. Change is a doorway into something new. It is a doorway into the unknown. And so oftentimes we resist it. But what we're going to do throughout this new series that we're launching today is throughout the series, we're going to talk about 3 very specific categories and types of changes. The first of those changes is evolutionary change. All right, this is a gradual process of changing into something different. This is when we move from what was to what will be. And all of our lives are marked by evolutionary change. All right, think about this. For the first 9 months of our existence, we're inside a womb. And we're growing ears and arms and legs. We're developing a heartbeat. We're forming muscles and organs and tissue. But after 9 months, what happens is we leave the womb. And the umbilical cord gets cut. At least for most of us, it gets cut. Some of you still leeching on to mama, right? But here's the deal. We leave that womb and we're helpless babies. Someone has to care for us and feed us, and they have to provide for us. And then we start getting a little bit older and we start to learn how to do some of that ourselves. And then we start to get even older than that, and we're gaining confidence and we're learning skills and talents. And eventually we have a job of our own, a career of our own, and a family of our own. So we go from being fully dependent on others to being independent. But it doesn't happen overnight. It's not quick, it's gradual. And if you're a parent, you know this, right? Because the process for a kid to go from fully dependent to being independent is agonizingly slow. Right? When my daughter Caitlin was 16 years old, my wife and I decided we were going to throw her a super sweet 16 birthday party. All right, this is going to be a big deal. I kid you not. In the middle of this party, she comes over to my wife and I, and we're hanging out, and she says, "Can you please leave?" I said, "Us leave? We're throwing you the party. We're paying for this. We put it together. It's a surprise. Can you please leave? You're embarrassing me." "What are we doing?" "You're here." "Okay." Well, we didn't leave. Now, that was 16. Fast forward 8 years. About 2 weeks ago, she said, "Hey, Dad, would you mind if I brought all my coworkers to your house for a party?" I said, "No, you can do that." So guess what? This past week, she had a party for her coworkers. Brought them to my house. And I kid you not, she asked my wife and I, "Can you hang out with us?" And I said, "No, you're embarrassing me." Guys, evolutionary change, right? This is what happens to all of us when we decide to follow Jesus. So if you've decided to follow Jesus, you know this. You open your heart, and it's not instant change. It's a lifetime of slow and gradual transformation where we're trying to sync our hearts with the heart of God, and we're trying to align our minds to the character of God. It's not automatic. It's an entire life. It's an evolutionary change. Another category of change is crisis change. Right? This is a sudden event that forces change on you. Now, with evolutionary change, we get to be in control a little bit, right? Because we can be making decisions, everything's unfolding slowly, so we're able to kind of redirect things as we feel like we need to, and we're kind of navigating our way around. With crisis change, we have very little control, right? It might be the loss of a loved one, a divorce that we did not see coming, unemployment, a natural disaster. It's just forced on us, right? That's what a crisis change is. And then there's a third category of change, and that is visionary change. Visionary change is a change that you voluntarily initiate. Right? It's a change that you and I introduced based on our desire to experience something new. So we voluntarily walk through the doorway. We don't know everything behind the doorway, but we know we want to walk through this. So if you want to get healthy, maybe shed some pounds, you say, all right, I'm going to make different decisions about what I eat and how much I move, and I'm going to initiate some change. That's visionary change. If you're a junior in high school and you want to get into some sort of field and you say, I'm going to become an intern or an apprentice, or I'm going to go to this college, and you start checking out colleges, what you're doing is you are working, you have this visionary change that you're trying to initiate and work on. And the reason we're talking about this for the next several weeks is because I want you to know it is possible to prepare for change before it shows up. Obviously, there are some changes that are easier to prepare for than others, but regardless of the type of change, we can be prepared. And so over the coming weeks, we're going to talk about these different types of changes: evolutionary change, crisis change, and visionary change, and how we can prepare for them. And what I want to do with the remaining time we have today is I want to zero in on this evolutionary change. And I want to look briefly at a story in our Bible that gives a great example of evolutionary change. And the reason I want to look at this particular story is there's just some great practical applications for us. All right, so the context is pretty simple. 3,300 years ago, the Jewish people are slaves in Egypt. They had been slaves in Egypt for more than 400 years. This is the world they knew. They just assumed it's always going to be our condition, it's always going to be our situation, it's always going to be our environment. We're going to be slaves. Well, one day, God, in a very dramatic way, speaks to a man named Moses, and he makes Moses a promise about the situation the Jewish people find themselves in. Here's what we read. Then the Lord told Moses, I have certainly seen the oppression of my people in Egypt. I have heard their cries of distress because of their harsh slave drivers. Yes, I am aware of their suffering. So I have come down to rescue them from the power of the Egyptians and lead them out of Egypt into their own fertile and spacious land. It is a land flowing with milk and honey. The land where the Canaanites, Hittites, Amorites, Perizzites, Hivites, and Jebusites now live. You must go, now go, for I am sending you to Pharaoh. You must lead my people out of Egypt. I love this. God says to Moses, hey, I've seen the oppression of the Jewish people. I've seen the harsh slave drivers in Egypt. I am going to rescue them. So now, Moses, you go and lead them out. And Moses' response, which we're not going to read, but his response is very, very reactionary. He's like, no, not me. I'm not qualified. I don't have a resume. I am not prepared to do this. Now, I just got to tell you, one of the things I love so much about our Bible, and one of the things that I think lends to the credibility of the scriptures, is just how raw it is. When God says, Moses, I've chosen you, it wasn't like he's like, yes, sir. It wasn't like, oh, great. And he runs into his tent, grabs his armor, grabs his weapons, and said, let's go. Let's do this thing. No, God says, Moses, I've chosen you. And he's like, nope, not going to do it. That's his response. It's so raw, and yet God doesn't relent. He says, Moses, I've chosen you to lead the people of Israel out of Egypt into a land flowing with milk and honey. Not milk and honeys. Yeah, he'd be running toward that, right? The milk and honey. It's a rich, fertile, and desirable land, right? A lot like Eau Claire. And so the land that God promises the Jewish people becomes known among them as the promised land because it was a land that God promised them, right? So here's a very ancient map of Egypt. This is where the Jewish people are, and God's going to lead them into the land of Canaan, which eventually becomes known to us as Israel, right? So they've been slaves for 400 years. God says things are going to change. They're going to go from slavery to freedom. They're going to go from having no property to becoming landowners. God promises to free the Israelites and give them land. That's what God does. He promises to free the Israelites and to give them land. Right? This is their own property. Now, not long after God makes this promise to Moses, there's a series of miracles that unfold in Egypt that really pave the way for the Israelites to leave the land of Egypt. And so this change happens fairly quickly. They go from slavery to freedom. And when they left Egypt, it should have been a 2-week journey to get to Canaan. It's really not that far, even when you're walking. But God had other plans. God wanted to take some time to form Israel as a nation, to build their trust and their confidence in Him, to help them learn how to sense and know where He's leading and guiding them. And so what should have been really days turn into weeks, and then those weeks turn into months. And it's roughly a year later before the Israelites finally find themselves on the edge of the promised land. Okay, so this is the big deal. 1 year into their journey, they're there. They've made it. This is the World Series. This is the Super Bowl. This is the big moment. And here's what we read. The Lord, we're going to go to the next slide. The Lord now said to Moses, send out men to explore the land of Canaan, the land I am giving to the Israelites. Send one leader from each of the 12 ancestral tribes. And so Moses did as the Lord commanded him. All right? So the Israelites are on the edge of Canaan, this land that they know God has promised is going to be theirs. And before they rush into the land, before they charge into it, before their big Braveheart moment, Moses has a sense that God's speaking to him, and God is commanding him that he's supposed to send 12 representatives, 12 spies into this land to explore it. Now, I know that what I'm about to say is going to lose some of you. But one of the very first things that you and I can do to help us prepare for the evolutionary, slow, gradual changes in our life is learn to discern the voice of God. Now, I know I'm going to lose some of you because I know I'm like you. And when it comes to the voice of God, it's like, oh my gosh, I try to hear it so desperately. I beg, God, just speak to me. And it's not easy. And I don't get it because I can recognize a lot of voices. I can recognize Arnold Schwarzenegger's voice, right? I can recognize Homer Simpson's voice, Morgan Freeman. Like I know my wife can call, I don't even have to see caller ID. I don't have to see caller ID with my kids. I recognize their voices. I recognize melodies and tunes. I was 4 years old. I knew what the ice cream truck sounded like. I'd run. And yet somehow trying to hear the voice of God just seems overwhelming. But Moses heard God. This is fascinating because Moses is a busy man. Moses has a lot on his plate. Moses is trying to lead people. He's trying to strategize. He has people pulling for his time. And yet there's something in Moses' schedule that he was intentional about making space and creating margin in his life for God to speak to him. So I'm just going to tell you, if you want to be prepared for whatever season God has next for you, my challenge to you is just create space in your life for God to speak. Whenever we gather in person, or if you regularly watch online or listen online, but you make it a practice in your life, I'm telling you, what you're doing is you're creating margin for God to speak. Because one of the ways God speaks is through the scriptures. And when the scriptures are being taught, you have an opportunity for God to speak to you. When you open the scriptures and you read them on your own, it's an opportunity for God to speak to you. And God speaks in different ways, right? Sometimes it's through groups. We love groups at Great Lakes Church. We're launching a group season in a month. God speaks often through the wisdom of other people. Because collectively, we're able to discern things that we may not be able to discern on our own. God can speak through ongoing restlessness where you can't explain. You're just like, man, I'm restless all the time about this. Primarily, that is the way that God has spoken to me over the years. God can speak through a prompting, or just out of the blue, you're sensing something really strong and you don't understand it. He speaks by opening and closing doors. Doors that you didn't force open and doors that you didn't push closed. God speaks by convicting us. I used to not feel convicted about that. I used to not feel bad. I used to not think it was a big deal. But all of a sudden, there's something there. It's that's God's Spirit doing that. Sometimes God's Spirit gives us special insight and understanding. So God speaks in all types of ways. But I'm telling you, I'm not going to pretend at any moment it's easy. I know, looking back over the years, I have misheard God. When I was 10 years old, I kid you not, I genuinely believed God was telling me I was going to be a professional singer. Yeah, that's what I thought. When I was in my early 20s, I prayed for a guy who was legally blind. I genuinely believed God told me he's gonna be healed when you pray for him. Now, thankfully, I never said that to him because he didn't get healed. But I felt it, man, I felt it. So come on, as much as I try, I'm off. But I think one of the reasons it's so hard to hear the voice of God is in part because we overcomplicate and overthink it. So I'm just gonna try to be super clear. God's plan for your life, like his will that we're always trying to decipher, is not some sort of blueprint with step-by-step instructions where you have to follow A and then B and then C, and it's like connect the dots, and if you do one thing wrong, you're screwed. Right? God's will, his plan for our life is more like a game plan. So with the Super Bowl, there's gonna be rules, there's gonna be boundaries, but there's a lot of flexibility within the rules and the boundaries. Right? There's a lot of freedom for audibles and for making plays as long as they stay within the boundaries and they follow the rules. When it comes to hearing the voice of God, God's given us personality. He's given us preferences and gifts and passions. He's given us so much freedom and flexibility. And so it's not like every day we got to get up and say, God, what is it that you willeth I have for breakfast? God says, eat what you want to eat. And I've said this before, and it's important for me to say multiple times throughout the year. For the most part, God couldn't care less where we live. He does care what kind of neighbor we are. For the most part, God couldn't care less what we do for a career. But he does care what kind of employee we are. This is important. And I say for the most part because there are moments, there are sometimes seasons in which God very specifically speaks something to us. I think it's rare. In my life, I could probably point to 2 or 3 times where I knew beyond a shadow of any doubt, God is speaking to me on this. So it does happen, but for the most part, there's flexibility. And Moses is in one of these scenarios where he hears very specifically God speak to him and tell him, I want you to send out spies and explore the land that you're headed towards. Which leads to a second lesson I want to point out, and that is this. As we're trying to navigate change, we need to learn as much as we can about where we are headed. Moses tells the spies to go out and see what the land is like, find out if the cities are protected or not, determine what how fertile the soil is. He says, bring back some crops, let me see what they're like. And so what happens is 12 men are sent out to do due diligence. All right, so initially God promises to free the Israelites and give them land. Over time, what happens is 12 men are sent out to do their due diligence. Moses tells them, explore the land, bring back any critical information to me. So incredibly practical. Right, if you're headed into retirement, one of the best things you can do is your due diligence and read books and talk to people who are retired and plan for retirement. So when you walk through that doorway, you're as ready as you can be without knowing all the information. Right? If you're going to enter into a new career or you're going to start a new job, that's what you kind of sense. This is what I want to do in this season. Do your due diligence. If you're getting married for the first time, read books. Talk to people who've been married for a while. Learn from them. Do your due diligence. I would say this is true in every arena of life in which there's going to be a change. Do your due diligence, except if you're going to be a parent for the very first time. If you are having your first child, do not talk to anybody who's actually been a parent because they will scare the heck out of you and you'll never want to have a kid. Other than that, do your due diligence, right? And that's what these spies are doing. They're taking time to explore the promised land. And they come back from exploring and they confirm it is a land of abundance. They confirm this is a good place. They confirm the harvest there is plentiful. They confirm this is amazing, but they're afraid. They come back, they say, it's amazing land. What we saw is incredible, but the people living there are strong. In comparison to us, they're giants. There's no way we're ever going to take that territory. There's no way we could ever claim that as our own. We're not ready for this. I love this because we've all done this before, right? We've all looked at the challenges in front of us and we've said the same things. This is going to be too hard. I don't have the skill set. My resume hasn't equipped me for that. I don't have the credentials. I don't have the network that other people have. I don't know what I'm doing. And so the spies conclude, we've done our due diligence and we've decided it's way too dangerous to move forward. As you can imagine, that kind of fear, that kind of anxiety, that kind of insecurity starts to spread among the Jewish people. And everyone is terrified. Here's what we read. Then the whole community began weeping aloud and they cried all night. They're like, give me my stuffed animal. Right? I want to watch Sesame Street. I mean, they are scared. And they ask, why is the Lord taking us to this country only to have us die in battle? Let's choose a new leader and go back to Egypt. Yeah, we're free, but it's too much uncertainty. Yeah, we were slaves back there, but at least it was predictable. And I don't blame the people of Israel. They're scared out of their minds because all the spies are saying it's overwhelming, it's too much, we can't do this. They're focusing on who they felt they were in comparison to others. They focus on what they didn't have, what they didn't know, what they couldn't do. And the spies were paralyzed in fear, and it spread among the people. And I should say, almost all of the spies were paralyzed because there were 2 exceptions, Joshua and Caleb. Joshua and Caleb, in the midst of the uncertainty, in the midst of the fear, they're actually confident that God's in control of everything. They said, hey, it's absolutely true that when we went into the land of Canaan, that the cities are fortified, the people are strong, that they look like giants compared to us, but we're convinced God's with us. This is so fascinating. 12 people see the exact same thing but come to different conclusions. 10 people see challenges in front of them, and they see those challenges as a threat. 2 people see those challenges as an opportunity. 12 people see the same thing. 10 say it's a threat. 2 say it's an opportunity. We need to move forward. Now, to be fair, there are going to be times we do our due diligence, and we say, okay, we need to slow down. We need to walk away. This is not right. Right, there was a time in my early 20s, I had a job opportunity I was excited about. I started to do my due diligence and just concluded this is unwise. There are other times, though, in life that we do our due diligence, and if we're honest, the only thing really holding us back is fear and uncertainty. And so the third lesson to help us prepare for evolutionary change is this. At some point, we have to walk into the unknown. Whether or not we're going to have the courage to walk into the unknown is going to be determined by the soundtracks that play in our minds. When you watch a scene in a movie, that scene is going to be impacted by the music in the background. Right? So you see a shark moving through the water, your mood is going to be impacted by whether the music is dramatic or whether it's playful, whether it's suspenseful or it's a waltz or a polka. Right? That absolutely impacts your mood. Every single one of us have different soundtracks that play in our mind, which is why when we're looking at a challenge in front of us, we either see that challenge as a threat or as an opportunity. We look at it and we've got the soundtrack. I can't. I'm unable. This is overwhelming. I'm not qualified. I don't know what I'm doing. The other soundtrack is I can't, but God can. I'm unable, but God is able. I'm overwhelmed, but I know God is with me and God is for me. Looking back over 2020 and 2021, I think everyone would be in agreement that the pandemic was an incredible tragedy. Devastating effects on finances and businesses and schools and education and friendships and the nation. There were deaths. I mean, just so much tragedy. It was a huge challenge, and I do not want to minimize that. But in the midst of the challenges, there were people who found opportunity. Opportunity to encourage, to love, to serve. Some people found it as an opportunity to start a new business, to launch a new product. I have a few friends that saw it as an opportunity to grow their online platform and influence, and it just exploded. Whenever you have a challenge in front of you, I promise you it's going to be overwhelming. You're going to look at your resume and say, I'm screwed. I'm not qualified. I don't have the experience or the training or the capacity. But you get to determine by the soundtracks in your mind whether it is a threat or is an opportunity. And when the spies returned from the promised land, 10 saw the threat. They focused on the lack of training, the weapons they didn't have. They focused on the experience they didn't have. But for Joshua and Caleb, it was an opportunity. Exact same challenges, but viewed it differently. And unfortunately, with the spies, their attitude rubbed off in the majority of the Israelites. And so the Israelites' fear actually kept them from moving forward. They said, we can't do it. They were paralyzed by fear. And instead of entering into the promised land and enjoying a new life, the people of Israel spent the next 40 years in the wilderness as God shaped their faith and their attitudes and their perspective. Last week, Pastor Rex announced his resignation as a Racine campus pastor here at Great Lakes Church, and he's taken on a new role as Director of Development and Communications for Habitat for Humanity in Racine. If you've been around, Rex is a huge part of our church. For 4.5 years, he's carried lots and lots of responsibility, been a blessing to me, but a blessing to so many of you. When he first told me he was stepping down, to say I was overwhelmed is an understatement. Instantly, the soundtracks of anxiety, fear, inadequacy, insecurity start playing in my mind. What's next? Who's going to replace Pastor Rex? What's going to happen to the Racine campus? What are we going to do from here? And so I'm just being honest. The last couple of weeks, I have had to work really, really hard and be really, really intentional at replacing the soundtracks. Every single day since Rex and I first talked, I have started the morning by playing a song, The Goodness of God. Because there's these lyrics that say, all of my life, you have been faithful. In all of my life, you've been so, so good. With every breath that I am able, I will sing of the goodness of God. That's what I've been listening to. Not the eye of the tiger, Right now, We Are the Champions, not Hell's Bells by AC/DC, right? I've been listening to songs about the goodness and faithfulness of God, and I know that sounds so lame and cliche. You are a pastor. Of course, that's what you do. But I promise you, my fear hasn't gone away. My anxiety hasn't gone away. My insecurities haven't gone away. But I'm listening to songs because I want that to be the backdrop for everything I'm feeling and every decision I'm making. The goodness and faithfulness of God. And I'm reminding myself that God is with us in every change, in every transition we go through. And in addition to listening to the song, The Goodness of God, every morning, I've been repeating the words of the Jewish prophet Jeremiah, who says, the faithful love of the Lord never ends. His mercies never cease. Great is his faithfulness. His mercies begin afresh each morning. So our board, our stewardship team, as we look to the future, we're praying for clarity of mind, for courage to stay on mission. We're praying that God, it clearly leads us into whatever season is next for our church. And in the coming weeks, we're going to give you updates on what that looks like, and I ask you to be praying for us. Ready or not, change is coming. It's coming to our church. It's coming to your life. It's coming to your place of work. It's just coming. It's just life. And I'm just going to be honest. I'm doing this series for me. We were supposed to launch a relationship series this month. And I'm like, man, I don't want to be studying on relationship. I need to be studying on change because I need to speak to myself. Change is an ongoing reality. Evolutionary change, crisis change, visionary change. The emotions we experience with change are not going away. We can be paralyzed with fear, or we can keep moving forward. We can see challenges as threats or opportunities. Just remember, we will not grow without change. Let me pray. Our Heavenly Father, we thank you that you are a God who does not change. Your character is consistent. Your promises are true. They hold fast in the midst of storms and in the midst of difficulty. But Lord, because we have to navigate change and transition, we desperately need you. And I pray that throughout this series, we would grow in our confidence of you. We would grow in the ways that we're able to prepare ourselves for change, and that you would help us to be courageous in the midst of difficulty and in the midst of challenges and in the midst of the storm. We pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.
Thanks for joining us here at Great Lakes Church. Again, my name is Carson, and I'm so glad that you chose to share some time with us this week. We hope something in this talk was meaningful to you, encouraging to you, and maybe even something worth writing down that you can go share with a friend. If you'd like to get involved, maybe join us at one of our physical locations in Southeast Wisconsin, or just be a part of our many other goings-on our social platforms or events in the area. Check out greatlakeschurch.com.